Well, it's good to speak with you today, Jim. I look forward to hearing your views on shippers' needs and desires to merge domestic and international logistics, as well as the challenges they face. Can you start by providing a brief background of yourself?
Great. Well, thanks, Dustin. I appreciate the call and the chance to participate in your blog. I'm Jim Blaeser. I'm publisher of American Shipper. For those of you who don't know us, American Shipper is about 40 years old, and we were founded to serve the information needs of North American shippers predominantly who are involved in global logistics. We also serve the needs of all the other participants in the shipping network, forwarders, 3PLs, carriers, etc. Some of the interesting things I'd like to talk about today stem from results from our research studies. About 5 years ago, we started benchmarking our readers on certain subjects like how they procure transportation or pay their freight bills. And in the context now of researching these subjects, we've kind of built some overarching themes that I think are more interesting to your readers than any particular function.
Thank you. Can you talk about so why are you seeing this trend? What are the reasons?
Well, I mean, I think that just to level set, what we're seeing here is more shippers that are looking to merge their international and domestic logistics operations. And again, we approach this from a U.S. centric point of view. So just bear with me on that. I know your interests are probably a little bit more global in that respect. The shippers that we see doing this are merging these two classically disparate organizations in part because of desire and in part because of circumstance. So maybe I'll just start with the desire. I mean, I think that it's not in today's in this day and age, it's never desirable to have silos within a company, and many large shippers run their organizations in silos today. Particularly being that the domestic group would be very much insulated from the international group. Many shippers I see, it's not uncommon for them to have an international department that's responsible for getting that freight to a DC or an import hub, and then they kind of wash their hands of it, and the domestic group takes over, and those two really don't have a lot of collaboration between each other or visibility across the organization. So clearly, I think that there's an idea in the marketplace, and I think there's a lot of merit to this idea that there's value to be had or to be wrung or savings to be wrung out of this by really collaborating across these two organizations and having a more well-orchestrated supply chain from origin to destination. Just to kind of borrow a sentiment from one of my advisory board members, the shipper who said no one ships from CY to CY or container yard to container yard. And in this day and age, shippers have to manage freight from origin to destination. And doing that with a kind of a bump in the road is definitely not ideal. So there's in part the desire, and then I think the other part, the circumstance I alluded to, has to do with sort of the unfortunate reality of business in the last 5 years. Many shippers here in the U.S. Were subject to cutbacks in the Great Recession. They lost headcount, and then we saw global trade volumes rebound in 2010 by about 14%, and then subsequent years by 4, 5, 6%, something in that range. So these volumes returned, but the headcount never did. And so what you're seeing now is that these shippers are being asked to do more with less. And I see a lot of instances where our readers, will be responsible for international now, and they might give me a call the next month and say, hey, I have this whole new book of whole new responsibility around internet or domestic. Help me with that. Help me understand what's going on in that market. So it's not uncommon, and also vice versa. I see a lot, and this is probably even more frequent as I see domestic shippers who are recently taking over responsibility for international shipments, and that's kind of poses its own challenges. So really, again, just to recap, it's in part because I think companies see a benefit to it, but also in large part because they've been forced into the situation where, a shipping guy is a shipping guy, regardless of whether they have had experience in international or domestic or whatnot.
You mentioned this rise in collaboration and orchestration in the supply chain. Can you talk about how is it done?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, and I think that ultimately the answer boils down to technology. These groups were distinctly different for so many years because they probably for a good reason. Nobody wanted to create them that way. It's just that the technology didn't exist to communicate it across these different operations, these different functions, because they are just very different. There's very different challenges, very different, in many cases, standards or just the means of doing business is different between international shipping and domestic shipping. So what you're seeing now and what's enabling, I think, this trend towards bringing these together is the idea that the technology can sit in between and translate and help connect the two in a way that was never feasible before.
And when do you think this trend will be even more prominent, or are there some things that'll make companies want to actually then take action to make these changes?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the big trend is getting more from less is what we're focusing on. I think that probably I don't know if there'll be a tipping point or so where things pick up pace, but I think what's always more compelling is that there's definitely a kind of a follow the leader attitude in these enterprises. So I think when there's documented case studies that say that this has been successfully done in large enterprises or complex businesses, and people take notice of that will probably spur more action. So I think that it's an increasing trend. There are companies who do connect the two, but I know firsthand many large U.S.-based importers and exporters, for that matter, who really have this classic, distinctly different organization right now in distinctly different segments, or the as I mentioned before, the large separation between international and domestic. So, I don't know that there's one inflection point coming. I just think that this is a growing trend that we'll see pick up pace over time as there's more success stories documented.
And do you have any final recommendations?
Well, I think that I alluded to before. There's a lot of challenges in this exercise, and I think that the recommendation I would have is, regardless of what side you come from, if you're a domestic shipper going international, or if you're an international shipper that's going domestic, so to speak, they don't underestimate the challenges or the nuance that you don't understand. You don't know what you don't know. Looking at like I mentioned before, the majority of shippers who I see undertaking this initiative have a very strong domestic background and very little international background. And I think that the pitfall there is to go and treat international shipping, international logistics, as if it's just trucking on water. As if it's the domestic exercise just taken on a in a foreign market or in between markets. And the reality is that that's really not true. So you have to understand the complexities of the market. Just to name a few, if you look at kind of the concentration of capacity in the international routes, it's a very different ballgame than domestic trucking. So you have to approach your procurement strategies very differently. Then the list goes on and on. So I guess my suggestion for those who are undertaking this initiative would be to do their homework. I think that's really the first thing you need to do, and understand where those complexities, the differences lie, and also to that extent try to highlight the similarities, because from a function standpoint, international and domestic are actually surprisingly the same. You still have to procure transportation and manage it and execute it, and then pay your bills. So if you focus on where those points of similarity are, I think it's going to allow you a better chance of being successful, so long as you are well aware of where the differences are.
And thank you, Jim, for sharing your insights on this new trend, emerging trend in the merging of domestic and international logistics.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, good.